Hello, my name is Daljit Gill-Badesha. I'm the parent educator here today, and today's workshop will be on understanding school-age children and the teenage years. This workshop is designed based on the latest research and best practices so that parents and children can thrive together. As a parent and as an educator, I know that the parenting journey is one we take with our children. As they grow and develop, so do we. And as we gain more information, we develop more confidence and competence in our parenting style. And today, we will take this journey together. We will talk about positive parenting and healthy child development. First of all, we'll talk a little bit about early childhood development. Early childhood development is the early years when children are ages 0 to 6. These years are very formative brain development years. But when we get to the age of 4, the front part of the child's brain starts to develop, and this part of the brain is where the executive function happens. And executive function is when children learn reasoning and decision-making skills. And the reason that we're starting here today is that this is the time when children typically start school, preschool, or kindergarten. And it's the same time when the executive functioning skills start to develop. So it's a real opportunity for us to influence who children are as they grow. Early childhood experiences are embedded within the development of the brain, and how we teach children during those years is through repetition and by talking up a storm. Talking up a storm and having a good relationship with our children is really important for their neuron connections. Neuron connections are the connections in the brain. Before we get into the workshop, I'd like to start with this quick video. This video talks about social and emotional health of children. And because children are moving from our family homes and the care of parents and maybe grandparents into school environments and community environments, understanding social and emotional health is really critical. So this 5-minute video will give you a chance to understand what this means for children during their ages of 4 to 6 and as they get ready for school. So let's watch this video.
Science tells us that brains, minds, are built, not born. And at the center of this dynamic architecture are a set of skills called executive function and self-regulation.
Children's self-regulation and executive function are key ingredients in their lifetime performance. It's not just about learning language or learning numbers or learning colors.
We have to be able to work effectively with others, with distractions, with multiple demands. These actually are skills that contribute to the productivity of the American workforce.
What should you have done next? Educators, I think, are looking for just this sort of thing. And when we describe what we mean by executive function, they say, yes, that's it. That's exactly, the problem. These kids, they can tell me these rules, but they can't actually use them.
What's this?
A toolbox.
A toolbox.
What is executive function?
Safety goggles. Probably the best way to think about it is sort of like an air traffic control system in the brain. Just like an air traffic control system has to manage lots of airplanes going on lots of runways and really exquisite timing and so on, a child has to manage a lot of information and avoid distractions. We really think of it as involving working memory and inhibitory control and mental flexibility. Take a situation where a child is having to take turns. So first of all, the child has to have inhibitory control. The child has to be able to stop whatever he or she is doing and let the other child take a turn.
Cute.
But when it's your turn again, you also have to remember what it is you're supposed to be doing. So that pulls on working memory. If the children who are taking the turns after you do something unpredictable, you have to be able to adjust what you're going to do next. and that requires mental flexibility. Children who are struggling with these capacities often look like children who just aren't paying attention, or children who are deliberately not controlling themselves.
If you don't have self-regulation, you act out and the teacher puts you in timeout, and so then you miss part of the learning that's going on, and then you are more upset because you're behind, and so you act out, and so you get this downward spiral.
How does executive function develop?
6, 7, 7, and plus 4.
In little children, and even in the infant and toddler years, you begin to see the roots of executive functioning skills. What's going on in our brains is unbelievably intricate and complicated.
The prefrontal cortex, or the front third of the brain, is important for executive function. But it's more than just prefrontal cortex. This region doesn't act alone. It's involved in controlling your behavior through its interactions with all other parts of the brain. The brain goes from a situation where you've got nearest neurons communicating very strongly with each other and ignoring the rest of the brain, to these widespread networks that are connecting these different areas. Executive function changes over the life course. It improves radically over the first few years.
I got a match prime.
It continues to improve throughout adolescence. It's not until early adulthood that you have the adult-type networks that are very strongly activated that connect different brain regions together.
Let's take notes.
Also, we believe that executive functions can be trained.
It's just like going to the gym. So the more you practice in these areas, the stronger the capacity is likely to become, because you're helping to strengthen those neural connections.
You're at 24.
Slowly but surely, you're going to be able to step back, and that child's going to go into the world with these skills where they can get along with other people, change rules, and they can be flexible, and they can accomplish new things, and they're unafraid.
I got bit by my dog in my arm. Oh dear.
If we don't learn these skills during the childhood and adolescent years when they're coming online, we are really ill-equipped as an adult to hold a job, to maintain a marriage, to raise children, to get along with each other, to basically be part of a civil society.
You're okay.
Now that you watched this video, we're going to move on to talk about middle childhood development. Middle childhood development is when children are the ages 6 to 12. This is the time when they enter school, kindergarten to grade 7. This is a really important time of development. We teach our children so much in the early years. We teach them how to communicate with neighbors and family and friends, tie their shoelaces, clean up their toys. We do a lot of skill development in those early years. And often what happens is when children start school, we think, okay, they're in school all day, and maybe we don't have to worry about them so much. But the reality is, these are really critical 6 years of a child's life. And most important is the time of day after school, Monday through Friday, 3 to 6 p.m. This is called the critical time of day for school-age kids. And the reason it's critical is this is the time when sometimes children get left unsupervised, or they're not engaged in productive activities. And during this time, they become at risk for injuries, preventable injuries in the home and in the community. And they're at risk for victimization, abuse, and other negative factors. But if we pay attention to them during the school-age years, during that after-school time, we can keep them engaged in positive activities and positive adults. And when children hit this age, sometimes we see that they want to do things on their own. They might get into gaming, they might get into video gaming, or they want to watch TV and movies on their own. But it's a really important time that we stay connected with our kids. It's also a time when children have a real capacity to contribute to what happens to them. They become leaders. This is a time to teach them to become leaders. So asking for their opinion on what should we do next? How do you think we should solve this problem? Are really important skills that they learn during this time. And giving them a voice in choosing what they do after school. What kind of interests do they have? It's a great exploratory time. Do you want to go to a dance program? Do you want to take a math class? Do you want to learn an instrument? So many things for children to explore during this time. And these years, these school age years, really become foundational to the teenage years. Sometimes as parents, we think, oh, okay, we'll wait to teach them when they're older. We'll wait to teach them how to have household responsibilities or how to behave in community because they're so young right now. But the truth is, it's the school age years when you have a real opportunity to cement the learning so that when they hit those teenage years and hormones start to change and a lot of other things start to happen, that they have those foundational skills to rely upon. This slide talks about the developmental milestones for school age kids, and they're really key. We want to ensure that children have involvement in meaningful activities and that they build solid social relationships. And this really means moving them into having solid relationships at school, with a school counselor, with other professionals involved in their life after school, whether that's a dance instructor, a swim instructor, a neighbor, maybe they're doing volunteer work. We really want to help them develop these social skills and these social relationships. And we want to be aware what are the developmental tasks during these years and help them have mastery over these tasks. Because the school age years, the children have more access to environments outside of their home. In the early years, they're with you and they're home. And maybe you know exactly where they are and you are the one taking them to different places. But during the school age years, they get opened up to a whole new world. And this is an exciting time for them. So we want to ensure that we're involved in those environments outside of the home. And of course, the brain development. There's a lot going on for children during these school age years. You know, in the early years, we talk a lot about explosive brain development. So it's a time when their neurons in their brains are just growing and growing, and there's billions of connections happening, and the brain cells are connecting to each other, and they're forming lifelong circuits. But what happens during the preteen years, and this slide will show you that, they go from birth with minimal connections to 6 years of age with lots of connections and lots of brain activity happening and density in those connections, to the preteen years when there's a pruning time that occurs. Pruning is kind of like, if you think about, if you don't use it, you lose it. Time in brain development for children and youth. So the activities that they don't do or the skills that they don't practice, they're at risk of losing. So preteens, which is really the ages 10 to 14, you know, when they start to resist us as parents a little bit, and maybe they don't want to hear from us as much, is really actually the time where we need to continue to develop our relationship with them so that the skills that we want them to have for the lifelong stay connected. We want to cement those skills. So we need to give them chances to practice what we want them to be. This is when giving children a chance to be leaders is really important. Getting them to take charge and make decisions. And it doesn't have to be big lifelong decisions. It could be as simple as decisions for what kind of after-school activity they want to do. Who do they want to visit this weekend? What's exciting for them? What new activity do they want to try? And maybe you'll try it with them. Because the preteen years is a great time for parents to learn new activities together. I can give you a personal example. When my kids were preteens was when we learned to ski together. Now, I'm not really a skier, but I learned that my kids really like outdoor activities, especially winter activities. So I learned with them how to ski. And it is something I hope that we can do forever together. So as they become adults, it's something I'm hoping we can continue to do. So that's just one example. But think about what you want to do. You might want to do a dance class together. You might want to do an art class together. Look at the interests of your children, look at your own interests, and work on these together. During the preteen time, there's another construction happening in the brain, and it's called the reconstruction period. So when you think about maybe a renovation in a home, and you have a home fully built and you need to, let's say, fix your washroom. In order to go in and fix your washroom, you need to turn the water off, and you might even need to turn the electricity off in order to do work on the plumbing. And interestingly, that's exactly what's happening in children's brains during this time. In order for parts of their brain to grow, other parts actually have to turn off for a while. So this is the time when you hear from parents, I don't know what happened, I taught him these skills and now he's forgotten. My child used to clean their room, now they don't do it anymore. They used to speak respectfully, now they don't do it anymore. So this is not just an unusual task of childhood, it is a very normative task of childhood. All children go through this reconstruction period. If you read the book at the bottom of the screen, called The Whole Brain Child by Daniel Siegel, he talks a lot more about this. I find this a really interesting phase of children's development. It is really important that for parts of the brain to be developed further, other parts do have to shut off for a while. And as parents, for us to have patience, to move through this phase with them. And maybe we have to remind them a lot more than we want to, and we have to repeat ourselves, and that can get frustrating, but is a normal part of development. In this next slide, we're going to see another video on the amygdala hijack. And so what that really is the amygdala is a part of your brain that's part of your animal brain, or we call it the primitive brain. It's the back of the brain. This is the part of the brain that has a fight, flight, or freeze response when it's under stress. And during the school age years, children can be quite stressed. And as parents, sometimes we don't recognize that stress. Did you know that mental health disorders and mental health issues arise during these school age years? And that this is the time when we pay attention to our children's behavior for something that maybe doesn't seem quite right, and you're not sure what it is that we have to ask for help from maybe a school counselor, your school teacher, your family doctor, public health nurse. There's a lot of support out there. But let's take a few minutes and watch this video, because this will give you an example of what the amygdala hijack is. And as a parent, we can talk about what you can do to support them through these moments of stress.
When customers are dissatisfied with your service, their feelings can run high. They may have emotional outbursts which seem impossible to deal with. Understanding why people have emotional outbursts can help us control them. Put simply, the amygdala is the emotional centre of the brain and the cortex is the thinking area. In particularly stressful or intense situations, the amygdala takes over the cortex, preparing us for fight or flight, and it makes it difficult for us to use intelligence or reasoning. This is known as the amygdala hijack. During an amygdala hijack, adrenaline is released and stays in the body for about 18 minutes. Here's an example of the amygdala hijack in action. The amygdala hijack is characterized by 3 signs: a strong emotional reaction, a sudden onset, and regretting your actions later. Any strong emotion can trip off the amygdala and impair the cortex's working memory. Rationality is overwhelmed by emotions and stops us from being able to think clearly. If you have an emotional outburst, you can regain control by forcing the thinking part of your brain into action. By labeling your emotions, you can reduce their intensity and return some of the activity back to the cortex, thus increasing cognitive control. The technique of giving assertive feedback is a good way to force the thinking part of your brain to analyse the situation. To do this, you identify how you feel, what is the emotion, about what event or behaviour caused it, and why. Why did that event cause that emotion? Simply identifying these things will help you think rationally about them and help you control the amygdala hijack. Saying these things out loud will let others know how you feel. You can also help others regain control if they are experiencing an amygdala hijack. Just label the emotions you think they are feeling by empathising with them. To empathise with the other person, identify how they feel, what is the emotion, about what event or behaviour caused it, and why. Why did that event cause that emotion? Then say these things out loud to the other person. For example, I can tell you're frustrated, that I was at lunch when you called. I realise you wanted a quick answer. Then pause to let your message sink in and to stop you from saying but. This forces the person to switch on their cortex in order to be able to understand your words. It also reassures them that you have an appreciation of their feelings and situation.
Now that you've watched the video, what you'll see is that when children experience too much stress, they can shut down. and they can have the response to fight, flight, or freeze. So fight meaning if you feel that you're in danger, you're going to come out fighting. Flight is if you feel that you're in danger or under too much stress, you're going to run away from the situation. Or if you feel that you're in danger, you might freeze out and you might not say anything at all. So think about the times when maybe you do this, because this amygdala hijack happens to all of us. It's not just children. So think about your own responses to stress. And if you're seeing this with your kids, how can you support them through? This slide here about the hand model of the brain comes from Daniel Siegel. And I love this example. So if you think about your hand, and I'm going to show you my hand, which is, this is the brain stem. This is the front of your brain. So exactly how my face is, the brain stem's back here. This is the front of the brain right here. This is how your brain is. And when we have stress, what happens is the amygdala hijack means the front of your brain doesn't connect with the back of your brain. And so we call it flip your lid. In Daniel Siegel's book, he calls it the captain has left the ship, or you flipped your lid. So what happens is when you are under stress or you're feeling threatened, the back of the brain, that's your animal brain, is meant to take over and help you survive, takes over, but the thinking brain, which is the front of our brain, stops working. So if a child is having a meltdown and they're younger, this part of the brain, the executive function, which we talked about earlier, isn't intact yet until they're at least 4 years old, usually between the ages of 4 and 6. But as they get older, they do have access to that front part of their brain. So what happens is, though, during times of stress and overwhelm, children can react more with their animal brain. And stress for children is different than what we might expect. It might be that they're hungry. It might be that they're thirsty. They didn't get enough sleep. They had too much interaction at school, or one activity to another activity. And so it's too much go, go, go. So what happens is you start to experience meltdowns. And with younger kids, we call it a temper tantrum or meltdown. But as they get older, school-age kids have the same issue, and so do teenagers. So the best thing that we can do is help them reconcile this brain, put the brain back together. And the ways to do that are actually not that complicated. You first start with some deep breathing, mindfulness activities. You can start with water, making sure that they've had something to eat. Have they had any physical activity during the day? When you do all of those things, what happens is the whole brain becomes integrated, and now you can have a reasonable conversation with your child. Sometimes what happens is we come home from work and we are also tired and stressed, and we have lost control over our executive functioning brain, the front of our brain. And then our children come home and do something that makes us upset. So they've got their back of the brain. And so what we're doing is we're fighting like this. And what we want to do in order to have a positive parenting approach is we want to take care of ourselves first, make sure we're coming with a reconciled brain, and that we're supporting children to get themselves under control. And then we have a good conversation, because then the two thinking brains, the reasonable part of our brains, can actually interact. And then we do that through lots of love and kindness. And remember, in the positive parenting approach, we always bring in nurture, discipline, and respect. And when we feel nurtured and respected, we're also more likely to have an open and honest conversation. And the same thing goes for our children, preteens and teenagers especially. When conflict happens, this slide talks about a few ways to, few skills to help get us through this time. First of all, don't engage in power struggles that are about who is right and what to think. That's not going to get us anywhere. I have teenagers, I know that. We won't win a battle of wills when it comes to our children. Focus on the importance of health and safety. If you're telling your child something that they cannot do, don't say to them, don't do it because I said so. Tell them if it's about a health and safety issue. For example, I want you to follow the driving rules because it'll keep you safe. I want you to look both ways before you cross the street so that you're safe. I want you to have healthy food first and a treat later because this is healthy for you. Give them the health and safety explanation, and you're more likely to resolve the conflict. Another key aspect is to model the language and tone of voice you expect from your kids. So sometimes we talk in a more abrasive manner, but we expect our kids to talk to us respectfully in return. And that doesn't always happen because communication is two ways. So remember to role model what you want to see from them. Try to stay calm and remember that you are in charge and you are the adult, even if they resist that. And if your own brain is intact, like we just talked about, and you've attended to your own needs, and you're not stressed, running late, hungry, overtired, but you're calm, you will have a better outcome with your kids. And you know, sometimes you're in a rush and you see a behavior or something's happened and you want to address it with your children right away, but you realize, you know, I'm running out to work, I only have 2 minutes for a conversation and it's gonna take longer. Don't start a conversation then that you can't finish. Take the time for yourself and for your child, be respectful, and talk about the issue when you have time to address it fully. And you can even let your child know. Say, you know, I really want to address this issue. We don't have time now. Let's talk about it after dinner tonight. That's really respectful for their time and your time. And it gives you time to maybe think about how do you really want to approach this situation and what outcome are you after? Do you want them to learn something? Or do you want them to feel do you want to know how they're feeling? So it gives you time to think about that. And I think when it comes to teenagers, be realistic about how teenagers act. And they don't always know how to handle disagreement. And I think even as a parent of a teenager, we don't know how to handle the disagreement either. So let's be a little bit realistic. Sometimes you have to take some time apart and come back together a little bit later. And I think most importantly, and this starts from when they're younger, find a way to say yes. Look for a common ground. All research on communication, negotiation always says, find that middle ground or find that common ground. That is where you will have the most success. But you know, as children get older, this slide talks about teenagers and crossing paths. And there's been a lot of research that tells us that as children hit the normal teen development years, it can really take a toll on parents. Teenagers are changing physically, emotionally, sexually. They're growing a circle of peers and maybe even a romantic relationship that you're not in agreement with. They might distance themselves from their parents emotionally. They stop idolizing us as parents. Remember when they were younger and you came home from work and they're so eager to see you at the door and they say, "Mommy's home," and they can't wait to hug you. And then when they're teenagers, you walk in the door and sometimes they grunt and say, "Oh, you're home." That's the tone that we hear. And so that's really hard as a parent because you're used to them caring that much about you and you're used to them idolizing you a bit. And then they hit the teenage years and you're no longer an idol to them. And in fact, they start to become critical of your faults. So everything you do is often wrong. And they nitpick the things that you're not doing right. And this is just really normal. It's part of how they become individuals. In order for a teenager to become an individual, they actually have to separate from their parents. They have to question parents' values and rules. And they have to make sense of those rules in their own minds and own worlds. And this is the time for them to learn while they're in your home and they have a safe place to practice these skills. It's better they learn these skills now as teenagers in the home before they go out into the real world fully. So give them a chance to practice and try to talk about that. And you can say to them, like, how did that go for you? How did that decision, were you successful with that decision? What did you learn? How would you do it differently next time? It is a really different kind of learning opportunity and teaching opportunity. There's also impacts to parents, sometimes in their own marriage and dissatisfaction between couples, and raising teenagers can create conflict amongst the two parents because maybe you're approaching it in two different styles. As a parent, you might start to develop low self-esteem or depression and anxiety, or you might feel like you have less satisfaction with your relationships at work, within your own family, or your life in general than you did when your kids were younger. And this is really normal. So that is why we say to parents, please ensure you always access help. Talk to other parents around you. Talk to other parents of teens. Get ideas from them, give them ideas, but make sure you have support for yourself, because how you show up in this relationship with your teenager really does matter. And when it comes to resolving problems, this slide talks a bit about a model for problem resolution and to use feeling language. Because when you want to communicate an issue with your teen, the best thing that you can do is really communicate that you care for them. This is where the nurturing comes in. But you express your discipline through your feeling words. I care about you, so I want to see this happen. I see what you're doing here. I feel this. Listen to what they have to say. Or you can say, I want this to happen in this way. Or I will also be sure to let you know what I'm doing because I'm going to be home late today too. That's an example. So you role model and use good feeling words with your children. So parents, stay the course. It can feel really hard. The teen years are a time when both parents and teens are renegotiating their relationship and creating a new future together. So it's not a time that you have distance in your relationship. It's time now that you make your relationship different. Because these teenager years is the time when you establish a new kind of parent-teen relationship that will then carry into adulthood. And that relationship will sustain many, many years. So to give you hope, don't give up. They need you now more than ever, even though teenagers may resist you. Take stock of your own attitude. Think to yourself, what can I do differently to support my child? And sometimes teens just need some tenderness. They don't need you to tell them what to do and how to do it. They just need a little bit of fun love, some kindness, some humor. Humor goes a long way. Sometimes you can't be the one to give them an answer. So use healthy adults in your life, aunts, uncles, cousins, older brothers, sisters, grandparents, to be the liaison between you and your teen. This is when our broad family networks really, really matter. And no matter how hard it feels, focus on what's working and look at the strengths. I bet you, if you look at your child's behavior now, your teenager's behavior now, you'll remember what they were like at 2-3 years of age. And they're probably not that different. So what worked then will work now. It's just that they're more mature. And always seek out helpful community resources and research that's proven. That's why on this slide, we've provided an example, parenting books, websites, and resources, just a small list to give you some good direction to get you going. But there's a lot more resources out there on the internet, at the libraries, through local community resources, nonprofits. There is a lot of information available for parents these days. And I wish you luck in raising your children and youth. Our information is available at the workshop, and please feel free to touch base anytime for more information. Thank you so much.